I lost 30 pounds in 7 months of marriage.
I lost 30 pounds in 7 months of marriage. 30 pounds. That's what almost a year of marriage cost me. Not from dieting, not from exercise, from the kind of exhaustion that burrows so deep into your bones that your body simply stops remembering why it should bother eating. By the time our first anniversary came and went, I had forgotten what it felt like to laugh spontaneously without first measuring whether it was appropriate. I had forgotten what real silence sounded like, the kind that doesn't press against your chest like a hand waiting to push you down. I had forgotten who Mallory was before she became his. And the most terrifying part? I almost stayed. I almost convinced myself that this hollowed-out, transparent version of me, this ghost drifting through a penthouse with marble floors and furniture that cost more than my parents' first home, was who I was always meant to become. That this was what love looked like when it grew up. Today, I'm going to take you inside that marriage. I'm going to show you exactly how a fairy tale proposal became a nightmare I didn't have the language to describe. How the man every woman in my life envied me for catching became the man I had to escape just to survive. And how I finally, after losing everything I thought I was, found the courage to choose myself when every part of me had been carefully trained to choose him instead. But before I begin, I need you to understand something important. I was not a weak woman. I was not naive. I was not desperate or broken before he found me. I was 24 years old, raised in a warm, close-knit family in a small coastal town where neighbors still brought casseroles when someone got sick and everyone showed up to everyone else's weddings. My parents had been married 31 years. My father still reached my mother's door before she could open it herself. My mother still made his coffee every single morning, 2 spoons of sugar, no more, no less, because that's how he had always taken it, and she had never stopped paying attention. I believed in love the way I believed in the tide. Invisible in its mechanics, undeniable in its power. Something that held you steady even when everything else felt uncertain. So when Yi-jun entered my life, I didn't recognize the warning signs. Or perhaps I saw them and simply didn't know yet that warnings could wear the costume of passion. That control could disguise itself as devotion. That a man who needed to possess everything around him could feel, in the beginning, like a man who simply couldn't get enough of you. He was 34 when we met. Founder and CEO of a tech logistics company that had made waves across Southeast Asia. The kind of man whose name appeared in industry publications and whose entrance into a room caused a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in its atmosphere. He walked like he had already won whatever competition everyone else was still preparing for. 7 months after our first date, he rented out an entire restaurant. 73 roses surrounded us, one for every day since the night he first told me he loved me. He got down on one knee, and I said yes before the question was even fully formed in the air between us. I meant it with everything I had. I just didn't yet understand what saying yes to Yi-jun would require me to give up. Before I take you deeper into the story, my mom said I won't be able to reach 1,000 subscribers. Let's prove her wrong together. Hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I read every single one. The first moment something felt wrong, I pushed it down so quickly I almost didn't feel it at all. We were 3 weeks into our marriage. I was still adjusting to everything, the vast city apartment, the housekeepers who appeared twice a week like quiet ghosts, the driver who waited in the lobby even on days I had nowhere to go. Yi-jun worked 16, sometimes 18-hour days. He left before the sun came up. He returned long after it went down. One evening I decided to cook dinner. Nothing elaborate, pasta, garlic bread, a simple salad. I lit candles. I put on the dress he had bought me during our honeymoon. I set the table, and I waited, because waiting felt like the most loving thing I could do. He came home at 11:30. The candles had burned themselves out. The pasta had gone cold. I was still sitting at the table. "You didn't have to wait," he said, loosening his tie, without looking at me. His voice wasn't sharp or cruel. It was something worse than that. It was flat. As though my hours of waiting were a minor logistical inconvenience he hadn't requested. "I wanted us to have dinner together," I said softly. "We haven't sat down together since the wedding." "I ate at the office." He moved toward the bedroom. "You should eat." You're getting thin. He disappeared down the hallway, and I sat there in the dark, the cold food in front of me, trying to locate the feeling growing quietly in the center of my chest. I told myself it was just the pressure he was under. I told myself marriage required patience. I told myself this was simply an adjustment period, and that adjustment periods eventually ended. I needed those things to be true, so I decided they were. The shrinking didn't happen all at once. That's the thing nobody tells you. It happens the way water shapes stone. Slowly, imperceptibly, one small erosion at a time, until one day you look at what remains and barely recognize its original form. Yijun had a particular talent. He never raised his voice. He never called me names. His method was quieter and far more effective than that. It was the small, consistent corrections that came so naturally they almost sounded like care. You don't need to talk so much at dinner parties. It's better to listen. People respect women who listen. That dress makes you look heavier than you are. The black one is more flattering. Why would you order that? You know it isn't good for you. Each comment standing alone was nothing. A pebble. A grain of sand. But they accumulated, day after day, week after week, until I was buried beneath the weight of them and couldn't understand why I felt so suffocated. I stopped choosing my own clothes. I stopped ordering at restaurants, just smiled, and said I'd have whatever he was having. I stopped calling my mother as often because Yijun had suggested I was too dependent on my family. I stopped having opinions that I voiced out loud. I stopped taking up space. I stopped and stopped and stopped until there was barely enough of me left to cast a shadow. The intimacy was where I felt it most acutely. I had entered our marriage completely inexperienced, something I had been honest with Yijun about from the beginning. He had said all the right things. That he would be patient. That we would learn each other at whatever pace felt right. That there was no rush. But Yijun was not a man who understood the concept of no rush. He approached our physical relationship the same way he approached everything else in his life. With intensity, with appetite, with an expectation of reciprocity that left no room for the reality of who I actually was. When my body resisted, when my mind withdrew to somewhere quieter and safer, I would see something move across his face in the dark. Not anger, disappointment. And somehow disappointment was worse because it made me feel like the problem wasn't what he was asking of me. The problem was me. "What's wrong with you?" he asked one night, his voice low and quiet in the darkness. "Don't you want me?"
I'm just tired, I whispered.
"You're always tired." He turned away from me. "I don't know what you do all day that leaves you with nothing left." I lay there listening to him breathe, tears sliding silently from the corners of my eyes into my hair. How could I explain to him that the exhaustion I carried wasn't physical? That it was the exhaustion of constant performance? Of monitoring every word, every expression, every choice against the invisible standard he had set and never fully revealed to me? I was so tired of being everything he needed me to be. I had forgotten how to simply be myself. I had also, somewhere along the way, forgotten who that self actually was. Yijun's mother visited on our 4-month anniversary. She was a small, precise woman with eyes that missed nothing and a tongue that spared no one. She looked at me the way someone looks at a piece of furniture they didn't choose but have learned to tolerate. "You've lost weight," she said, scanning me up and down in the foyer. "Good. Yijun likes his women slim." His women. As though I were part of a collection. "It's so lovely to have you here," I managed, keeping my voice even. "Can I get you some tea?" "I'll have the housekeeper do it." She moved past me into the living room. "Sit down. You look pale." Over the next 3 hours, I learned that Yijun's most serious ex-girlfriend had been a concert pianist. That his mother had hoped he would choose someone from a more established background. That she was already deeply concerned about the absence of any pregnancy news and couldn't understand what was taking so long. "These things take time," I said, my face warm. She looked at me with genuine bewilderment. "You're young and healthy. What time is there to take?" Throughout the entire visit, Yijun sat in the armchair across from her, scrolling through his phone, nodding occasionally. He didn't redirect the conversation. He didn't step in. He didn't defend me. He never defended me. There were good days. That's the part of the story that makes it so complicated, so difficult to explain to people who haven't lived it. Some mornings Yi-jun would wake up soft. He would press a kiss to my forehead before leaving. He would send messages during the day, thinking of you. Can't wait to come home. On those days, I felt like I was finally seeing the man I had actually married. The man who had written me letters during our courtship. The man who had flown across the country just to surprise me on my birthday. The man whose eyes had filled with tears when I walked down the aisle toward him. He would bring flowers home. He would take me to dinner and hold my hand across the table and tell me he was sorry, that work was crushing him, that I was the only steady thing in his life, and he would do better. And I believed him every single time. Because I needed to. Because those moments were the oxygen that kept me alive inside everything else. I know I'm not always easy, he said one night, his head resting in my lap while we sat on the couch. I know I ask a lot sometimes, but it's only because I see what we could build together. I just need you to trust me completely. I do trust you, I said, my fingers moving through his hair. Then stop making things so difficult, he murmured. I didn't respond, but something cold and quiet settled into my chest like a stone dropping to the bottom of still water. When had I ever made anything difficult? The first time he truly frightened me, his apology afterward was so beautiful that I almost convinced myself the moment itself hadn't happened. We were at a company gala. Crystal chandeliers. Champagne towers. A room full of people whose attention Yi-jun required like sunlight. I was wearing a gown he had selected, my hair styled by someone he had booked, my smile fixed in place so long my face had started to ache. A colleague of his approached me at the bar. Someone I had met briefly at a previous event. He was harmless, making easy conversation about the evening, the food, nothing of consequence. I didn't see Yi-jun coming. I felt his hand close around my arm first.
Tight.
Too tight. And then his voice, smooth and controlled, directed at the colleague. My wife needs to circulate. Excuse us. He steered me across the ballroom without releasing his grip, down a hallway away from the noise and the light. When he finally stopped, his face was something I had never seen before. What exactly were you doing? His voice was barely above a whisper. I was talking, I said. He came up to me. I was just being polite. You were flirting. His eyes were flat and dark. Everyone in that room could see it. I wasn't. The words came out louder than I intended. His hand tightened on my arm, and I gasped at the pressure. Don't raise your voice at me, he said quietly. Not here. Not anywhere. He released me, and I stumbled back against the wall, my arm throbbing, my heart slamming against my ribs. Fix your expression, he said. We're going back in. I stood in that hallway alone, and I shook. When I finally walked back into the ballroom, my smile was in place. But something inside me had cracked along a fault line I hadn't known existed. That night he held me and wept. He said he didn't know what had come over him. He said I was the only good thing in his life, and the thought of losing me made him irrational. He promised it would never happen again. I looked at the bruise forming on my arm. I chose to believe him anyway. My mother called on a Tuesday evening. Yi-jun was working late. I was alone on the couch with a cup of tea that had gone cold beside me. Mallory. Her voice was careful in the way mothers' voices get when they're about to say something they've been holding back. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Okay, I said slowly. Are you happy? The question landed like something dropped from a great height. I opened my mouth. The automatic response was right there, assembled and ready. Of course. Why wouldn't I be? It didn't come out. I've been watching you, she continued. At your father's birthday. At the family dinner last month. You're not yourself, sweetheart. You're disappearing.
I'm just tired, I vispred.
Marriage is an adjustment. Adjustment is discovering he leaves his shoes in the middle of the floor, my mother said firmly. Adjustment is not losing 20 pounds and forgetting how to be in a room comfortably. Mom, is he hurting you? The silence that followed was the longest of my life. Was he? What did hurting even mean here?
He hadn't hit me.
He hadn't screamed at me or locked me away or forbidden me from leaving. He had simply, methodically, reduced me. Piece by piece, choice by choice, until the woman I had been was barely a memory, even to herself. He's not hitting me, I finally said. If that's what you're asking. My mother was quiet. Then, there are more ways to hurt someone than with fists. I love you. I'm here. Whenever you're ready to tell me the truth. After we hung up, I sat in the dark apartment, and for the first time, I let myself wonder if she was right. It was a Thursday night when I heard the phone call. I had gone to bed early, or pretended to, because I had learned that being asleep when Yijun came home meant avoiding whatever role he would need me to perform that evening. But I was lying in the dark, awake, when I heard his voice drifting down the hallway from his study. He was speaking in Korean, then switched to English mid-conversation. No, she doesn't know anything. A laugh. Cold and casual. She's too trusting. That was actually what I found appealing about her initially. Easy to shape. I couldn't move. My family wanted someone with more of a pedigree. But Mallory was exactly what I needed. Young. Inexperienced. No complicated history to manage. And presentable enough to bring to events. The room felt like it was tilting. Love. Another laugh. I don't think I'm wired that way. But she serves her purpose. She'll give me children once we work through whatever is holding her back. And if that doesn't happen, a pause. There are always other options. I lay there in the darkness long after he hung up. I don't know how long. Time had stopped functioning normally. I had been selected, evaluated, chosen the way you choose a tool that fits a specific job. The courtship, the love letters, the roses, the tears at the altar. All of it had been construction. Architecture designed to produce a particular outcome. And I had walked into it with my whole heart open, never once suspecting that the blueprint existed before I did. 3 days later, I found the emails. I wasn't deliberately searching. Or maybe by that point something in me had finally decided it deserved the truth. Yijun had left his laptop open on his desk. An email thread was visible on the screen, a name I didn't recognize, stretching back months. Back before our wedding. I miss you. This marriage is a temporary arrangement. Once I have what I need from it, the credibility, the stability, the family image, we can be together properly. Just be patient with me. There were more. Details I won't share here because some wounds are too intimate to fully expose. But I read enough. I had never been a wife to Yijun. I had been a strategy. I sat down on the floor of his study, and I came apart completely. Not gracefully. Not quietly. I made sounds I didn't recognize as coming from myself because the grief was too enormous to shape into anything dignified. Everything I had handed him, my body, my trust, my identity, my future, had been received by someone who had cataloged it all as an asset and moved on. I had erased myself completely, and the man I had erased myself for hadn't even noticed I was gone. When Yijun came home that night, I was waiting. One suitcase sat by the door. Nothing he had bought me was inside it. Nothing that carried the fingerprints of his money or his control. He walked in, stopped, looked at the suitcase, looked at me. What is this? His voice was measured. I'm leaving, I said. And I was genuinely surprised by how steady I sounded. I heard her phone call. I read your emails. Something shifted behind his eyes. Calculation moving like weather across a landscape.
Mallory, don't.
Don't tell me I misunderstood, I said. Don't tell me I'm being emotional. Don't do any of the things you usually do to make me question what I know. I know what I heard. I know what I read. He was quiet. Then he straightened, crossed his arms, and looked at me with something close to resignation.
Fini.
You want to leave, leave. I'll give you a generous settlement. You'll sign a confidentiality agreement. This stays private. I stared at him. Even now, even in this moment, he was negotiating. I don't want your money, I said quietly. I want my life back. I want to remember who I was before I met you. I want to sleep through the night without wondering what I've done wrong. I want to eat what I want and speak without being corrected and exist without making myself smaller every single day until there's nothing left of me. His jaw tightened. You're being dramatic. No, I said. I'm being honest. Probably the most honest I've been since the day I married you. I picked up the suitcase handle. If you walk out that door, he said, his voice dropping low, You leave with nothing. No money, no connections, no support from anyone in the city. I'll make sure of it. You'll be nobody. I turned and looked at him one last time. I'm already nobody, I said. You made sure of that. At least now I get to be nobody on my own terms. And I walked out. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. I moved back into my childhood bedroom. Flower wallpaper, a twin bed, the quiet, familiar smell of my parents' house. I was broke. I was hollowed out. I spent the first 2 weeks sleeping and crying and trying to remember how a person makes basic decisions for themselves when they've spent a year outsourcing everyone. My mother fed me soup and sat beside me without asking me to perform recovery before I was ready. My father took me walking along the beach in the evenings and told me about the darkest seasons of his own life, the failures and losses he had never spoken about before, and how he had come through them not by forgetting, but by discovering that he was more durable than the thing that broke him. You will be too, he said one evening while the sun turned the water gold. You already are. I found a therapist who specialized in emotional abuse. Sitting across from her in her small, quiet office, I began to understand that what had happened to me had a name. That the steady erosion of my identity, the isolation from my family, the constant small corrections, the grip on my arm in that hallway, these were not the random cruelties of a flawed man. They were patterns, methods, a system of control that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with ownership. You didn't fail your marriage, she told me during one of our early sessions. Your marriage was built to fail you. You were set up to lose from the very beginning. The remarkable thing is that you got out. I started a job at a local bookstore. Minimum wage. Nothing impressive. But every morning I chose what to wear, without consulting anyone. I ordered lunch without asking permission. I laughed at ridiculous jokes with my coworkers and didn't stop to check whether the laughter was appropriate. I called my mother whenever I wanted to. Small things. Everything things. It took 2 years to feel like myself again. Not the self I had been before June. I cannot go back to her. She was innocent in a way I can no longer be, certain of love in a way that experience has complicated. But I became someone new. Someone harder in some places and softer in others. Someone who understood her own value not because a man had assigned it, but because she had dug it out of the rubble of everything she had lost and recognized it as something that had always been there. I began writing. Journaling at first, then longer essays. I shared pieces of my story anonymously and was overwhelmed by what came back. Thousands of women who recognized themselves in what I described, who had been reduced in the same quiet, systematic ways, who had been convinced that the problem was themselves. We were never the problem. I'm 31 now. 7 years have passed since I walked out of that apartment with one suitcase and no plan beyond survival. I live in a small cottage near the sea, 20 minutes from my parents. I write about healing, about recognizing the patterns that masquerade as love, about the long and nonlinear road back to yourself after you've been thoroughly lost. I'm not married. I'm not certain I will be again. But I have learned that a life without a partner is not a life without love. I have my family. I have friendships that have become their own kind of family. And I have, finally and fully, myself. That last one was the hardest to reclaim. It was also the most important. Some nights I still dream about that apartment. The marble floors. The silence that was never actually silence. The constant low-level pressure of being evaluated and found slightly lacking. I wake up gasping, disoriented, heart hammering. And then I hear the ocean outside my window. I feel the weight of my own blankets. I see the books stacked on my nightstand, the plants on the windowsill, the beautiful, ordinary mess of a life that belongs entirely to me. And I breathe. And I remember that I got out. Survival, I have learned, is sometimes the most courageous thing a woman can do. Not dramatic survival. Not survival that looks like anything from the outside. Just the quiet, daily decision to keep going, keep choosing yourself, keep insisting on your own existence, even when everything around you has been arranged to make you doubt it. If any part of this story felt familiar to you, if you recognized yourself in the shrinking, in the constant adjustment, in the exhaustion of performing yourself into nothing, I want you to hear this clearly. It is never too late to leave. It is never too late to choose yourself. Even if you've lost years. Even if you no longer know who you are without him. Even if everyone looking at your life from the outside sees something that looks like success. You deserve to be loved without having to earn it. You deserve to take up space without apologizing. You deserve to exist as a complete human being, not a carefully managed reflection of someone else's requirements. If you're watching this and you needed to hear it today, I see you. I believe you. And I promise you, you are so much stronger than you currently know. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Share it with someone who might need it today. And leave a comment below. Tell me your story, tell me where you're watching from, or simply let me know you're out there. We heal in community. We rise together. And we never go back. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.